Welcome to the University of St. Joseph. I'm Dr. Jennifer Cody, and I'm an associate professor of history here at the university. And we're very happy that you can join us this evening for a very important conversation with Doug Glanville. As many of you likely know, the university's mission and values are grounded in issues of social justice. We look head-on at the ways in which power is constructed and then stratified by factors such as race, gender, sexual orientation. We seek to understand these issues and work to make them better. Doug Glanville's lived experience reflects a too frequent occurrence in American society, a perpetuation of racial assumptions and stigma, and an absence of justice. But I'm not here to introduce Doug Glanville. I'm here to introduce his introducer, Rand Richards Cooper. Rand is a fiction and nonfiction writer who lives here in Connecticut. His nonfiction work, grounded in politics and cultural criticism, can often be found in publications like Commonweal magazine. Most recently, his pieces have focused on the gains and losses of smartphone usage. I noticed that he said that he himself won't partake in the ubiquitous devices, and I confess I only got one about a year ago. His short fiction has appeared in several high-profile outlets, including GQ, Esquire, and The Atlantic, as well as the Best American Short Stories. He's been a writer in residence at 2 New England colleges, and we're delighted to have him here tonight. Rand?
Hi.
My name's J.C. McCauley.
I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Doug Glanville is my neighbor in Hartford and friend, and I want to introduce him just by referring to a universally recognized rule for the distribution of talents, namely that no human shall ever possess 2 different champion skill sets. For instance, we know that some people are movie star gorgeous. That's fine because we need movie stars. But those same gorgeous people shouldn't be able to say, teach Aristotle. And generally they can't. In the same way, a 3-star Michelin chef may be a wizard in the kitchen, but if she also won the Nobel Prize for Physics, you might be a little aggrieved. In other words, here's the rule. World-class ability in any one area should be accompanied by complete helplessness in all other areas. That's why Bobby Fischer, along with being a chess prodigy, was not also an Olympic pole vaulter. It's only fair, right? Well, Doug Glanville brazenly violates this universal rule. For 9 years, he was a distinguished Major League Baseball player. In 1999, for baseball fans, this will be meaningful to you, he batted .325 while stealing 34 bases. But now comes the unfair part. We know that a lot of professional athletes, after they retire, go on to be sports announcers. And after retiring in 2005, Doug did that. But he also became a writer. I remember opening the Times and seeing his byline. This was before I knew Doug. I didn't expect much. I mean, the dude has spent his whole life playing baseball, right? He can't be a real writer, right? Wrong. Over the past decade, Doug has written a series of op-eds in the New York Times, and whether he's writing about the insecurities that shadow an aging professional athlete, or his own difficult decision not to use performance-enhancing drugs, Doug writes with candor, wisdom, and wit. In 2010, he published the book he's going to be signing afterward tonight, The Game from Where I Stand. When that book came out, the acclaimed journalist and author of Friday Night Lights, Buzz Bissinger, called this a book of uncommon grace and elegance, filled with insight and a certain kind of poetry. I've been a writer for a long time. I've never had anyone say that about anything. The first African-American Ivy League graduate ever to play in Major League Baseball. Doug has an engineering degree from the University of Pennsylvania. So I guess if your town needs to build a bridge, he's your guy for that too. In short, Doug is like those late night commercials you used to see. You know, you get all this, and wait, there's more. Since moving to Hartford, Doug and his wife Tiffany have worked hard to bolster the quality of life in our neighborhood and in our city. Tiffany serves on the Board of Education. Doug is on the board of the Major League Baseball Players Alumni Association, and he runs a scholarship foundation in honor of his late father, Dr. Cecil E. Glanville. In short, I truly and honestly cannot think of any person in the world better qualified than Doug to speak eloquently about sports and the lessons they hold for life. Doug Glanville.
Okay. Thank you, Rand, for that wonderful introduction. I have double mics going on here, and I do have a cell phone, and I use it quite often, sometimes to my own chagrin. But it is an honor to be here, University of St. Joe's. We talked about this. I was in Standard Beach in Westbrook, and where's our fearless leader, Andy? Thank you, who came and approached me and mentioned that a speaker series could be created here at University of St. Joe's. And I was like, oh, that's a fantastic opportunity. And I've been working a lot in the intersection between sports, communication, social justice. And I slowly began getting this sort of campaign moving, just writing about some of the hot button issues that exist today. And so we started working on a chance to work together here at the university. And slowly it evolved to this wonderful crowd here tonight to just discuss some of the experiences and perspectives I've gained from being in communications directly at ESPN and writing, and also the lens of professional sports and social justice, sort of this world that you expect a meritocracy and you hope for our best to be united on the field as one, and using that lesson and elevating it so that our society sees it as a great example to model. And those are the sort of the great hopes of any athlete when you go in and wear some city or country or state on your chest when you're representing your team or school, and also on your back. They say play for the name on the front, not the name on the back, but your back certainly has a legacy of its own with your family. And so I felt that sports could be the perfect segue into discussing social justice in setting these examples. And so one exercise I'd like to walk through is I drew up a case study, and it's a familiar story, but I thought it would be a good way to look into not only the moments that you can have where social justice can come to light, where you may want to exercise your right to address the issue and hopefully elevate it that it benefits all people or as many people as possible, and also look at the communication side of it, because so much of the effectiveness of social justice revolves around communication. The messaging, is that message going to be maintain its integrity or get co-opted in another direction? There's so many pitfalls to trying to address something, even as passionate as you could be about a topic. There's a lot of ways it could sort of fall off the rails and you could lose the message. So with those experiences, I'd love to walk this story through you, and love your assistance at some point, and then we'll do some Q&A and just get into some discussion. So I appreciate that. So the title is Responding to Injustice in Ways That Work. And I certainly don't profess to have some universal elixir as to everything that works when you're trying to address difficult issues. But at the same time, I was able to catalog experiences that are either firsthand, secondhand, thirdhand, that I did some research on to put together this presentation, and pull from it some experiences from working in media that I thought lended itself to being effective in terms of reaching people and sometimes changing the narrative. So I'm going to walk you through this scene, and I'll try not to pace because it's really tempting to just, and I'm going to be blocking everything, so I'll do my best. So I'm going to set the scene. So you're Los Angeles, California is the scene. That's the destination, and particularly Los Angeles International Airport. So it's a day of business travel. You have a business traveler entering an executive car about 2 years ago. It's 4:30 at night, and it's on the East Coast, and the flight is going to leave at 6:30 p.m. Typical busy evening, business travelers all around. And now the destination that, from this standpoint, recognizing that the travel time now for the next destination is another 3 hours away. So this gentleman or this man has 90-minute layover and 3 more hours of travel time in front of him. So the final destination is interrupted by this layover, and in this case it was Minneapolis, Minnesota. And he gets on its first class seating, runs into a colleague. So the colleague and the business traveler sit together and ultimately reach their destination at 11:40 p.m. Now this is Pacific time, so now you're looking at about 10 hours of travel if you think about door to door. So at baggage claim, there's about a long delay, about 45 minutes delay. The traveler doesn't have a bag, just a carry-on, but the colleague has something that he checked in baggage claim. So now it's another 45 minutes to wait. So it's a long delay. So now you're pushing 11 hours of travel. It's a long day. So let's just review. 4:30 Eastern, 2 flight segment connections, waiting for baggage, arrival time, finally gets to a taxi stand almost at 1 in the morning. Total travel time is 11 hours. And I talk about the biological clock, leaving on the East Coast, 3:30 in the morning. So it seems simple. So just at this moment, you start thinking about what all of us sort of entertain. You have an image in your head. Who is this business traveler? Who is this colleague? We might think of income or profession, ethnicity, religion, identity, gender. All these play into this question about what we're imagining the experience of this traveler. And this is significant because this often informs how we approach what we consider justice. So let's talk about a scenario. So Los Angeles Airport, these are the numbers. 4th busiest airport in the world. Atlanta's number 1 in obviously US and now also the world. 100 million passengers is Atlanta. So 81 million at LAX, 23 million international. So they have an incredible amount of diversity of people coming through. Occupancy rate, 80%, which is a huge number. 2,500 taxi cabs, and this is sort of an average. There's days where it's up to 5,800. So you can make a calculation where you're talking 6 million taxi trips. So you're going to need good service. You're going to need efficiency, all these to get people to where they're going in an experience that really encapsulates what is Los Angeles Airport or Los Angeles region in general. It's sort of a beacon of diversity. Here are all the taxi companies that are dispatched amongst various locations. And you can see there's about 9 cab companies. Some originate at the destination from dispatch, and then there's other ride-sharing companies, which is actually relatively new. 2017, in August, was the first time they were allowing both pickup and drop-off in one trip. So you can go and drive and pick up at the same time. So typical view, and I've been to LA a number of times, this is what you're looking at, even at this hour. Taxi company, you can see all the different companies, the green cab, your white, yellow, and they have a dispatch, they're called starters, and their connection point is they pick you up and they sort of guide you to the cab, and they're called starters. And there's a company, airline transportation, airline taxi supervisors that sort of oversees the connection point. So it seems simple enough, 11 hours of travel, trying to get the cab, you have a facilitator there to help you. So now the destination for the business travel is LA Hotel. LA Hotel is about 25 miles away, $70 or so cab ride, so that's pretty pricey. And so it's a significant fine for any taxi driver that's trying to obtain a fare. So now, cab pulls up, now you have the business traveler and you have the colleague. The colleague goes to the window as the taxi driver rolls the window down and says, "We're going to the Los Angeles Hotel." So the cab driver then pops the trunk, gets out of the cab, walks towards the back. The colleague and the traveler then proceed towards the back with their various bags to put them in the trunk and take off. But they run into a glitch. And the glitch says the taxi driver then sees the traveler and says, and I'm going to give you a multiple choice question here. You guys can think about this. A, let me help with your luggage. You guys just get in, I'll take care of the rest. B, I'm sorry, sir, I already have a passenger. Please talk to dispatch for the next ride. Thank you. So that's the assumption that maybe the traveler was poaching the ride of the colleague. So a little bit of miscommunication, that's certainly possible. And then it gets a little bit more confrontational. You cannot take this passenger's ride, wait for the next cab. And then finally, going off the rails, it's go take the bus, it's $19. Not even dealing with you. So you have these possibilities. And all of these are going to evoke certain reactions as to what you're expecting in service, especially after a long travel day of 11 hours. You have a certain expectation of service. You're paying for this service, and it's a very simple transaction. You have a dispatch, puts you in the cab, you go to where you're going. X, A, B, C, easy. So as you think about these scenarios, a lot comes to mind. You go back to, well, wait, who's the traveler? Who's the colleague? Does it really matter? Who's driving the cab? Most of the times we don't have to think about these things. You're just hailing a cab. But we know that there's possibilities that can change depending on sometimes the demography or the identity of the passenger. We know there's been challenges there. So the question I asked is, does this change anything? What the business traveler looks like? What does the cab driver look like? Is it that simple? Is it about their identity? So the cab driver, in description, in this particular situation, was described as Far East Asian, in 60s, salt and pepper hair, wearing glasses, and had a very heavy accent. But why is that significant? Well, here's the traveling duo. That's me. That's the colleague. And that's me and the colleague. So there's Joe Vanderford, and that's me on the way to work for ESPN. So that's interesting, right? Well, this is what he actually said. Go take the bus, and he said it 3 times. So now you have a problem, right? Everybody would agree you have a problem right now. Go take the bus, it's $19. Now, my colleague was completely befuddled by this statement, right? Because he said, I don't understand, we're here at a taxi stand, why would we take the bus? He was just totally confused. So the dispatch guy comes out and he's trying to fix it. He's kind of a young guy, and he's like, explaining to the driver, you have to take them. You cannot refuse service. You can't just refuse service. And the more he spoke, the more he dug in. No, go take the bus. And he was actually pointing across the street. Go take the bus. So I'm trying to figure out, what is that? First of all, what does that mean exactly? Like, I know there's these shuttles around, but he knew the price exactly, which was strange enough. He didn't know where I was going. So the other question that came to mind is, well, you have a very significant fare. It's more than $19. You have a $70 cab ride. Now, I'd done this trip a number of times for ESPN, so I knew this wasn't a cheap situation. You're going to make a decent amount of money. So all the more is totally off balance. Now, the interesting thing also is that we weren't on the curb. We were actually 1 lane in. So we were kind of in the middle of the street. And so the guy's like yelling, and eventually, the dispatch guy starts to get frustrated. And I said, look, obviously at this point, after 3 times, I'm not going to get in this cab, even if he changes his mind. This is a bad situation. So we walk out, and eventually it was just, something you could not resolve. And when I turned with my bag and my colleague followed me, another passenger came who was Caucasian, and he took the passenger. So then I was confused, like, wait a minute, if you can refuse service to someone, how are you allowed to take someone else? So right there, that sort of created this sort of tension, right? So now you're getting back in line, or effectively to the next cab. And so now we're talking, it's 1:15 in the morning, and you still haven't gotten to your destination. Now, my experiences with taxis at airports throughout my entire, baseball career or ESPN was actually very positive. And it seemed like it's very bold to have this experience first of all, every camera under the sun is at the airport, right? So you have to feel very comfortable to be able to take that position when there's that much attention and that busy of a time, even at LA. So the passengers, so we go back, and what was so amazing is we get into the next cab. It's the same cab company, and the guy was from Sri Lanka. We ended up talking to him. And he said, so we sit down, and a woman comes out with one of those reflecting vests, and literally opens the door and tells me in particular to get out. So I was like, whoa, what is this now? So now it's like we're moving to like assault now, or what's happening, right? So she tells me to get out, but she says, sir, and the quote was, "You're the third black guy this has happened to on my shift tonight. You need to file a complaint and do something about this." Now, I was already filing something with the starter, but that kind of gave me a different motivation, which goes to the question of injustice. You realizing, wait a minute, this is happening to more than just me, right? This is something larger. Now, we always hear a lot of stories and true stories about sometimes the tension between taxis and African-American riders and things like that. But I'd never had this so boldly in my face and at the same time find out that this was going on at a larger scale, right under this umbrella of protection and visibility, basically. So now what? I would say the Ghostbusters theme, but could be dating myself. But they made a sequel or a new one recently, right? So who are you going to call? And this is part of the problem. You're absolutely off balance at this point. So what do? You don't even know where to start. The cab drove off. I'm in another cab. It's 1 in the morning. I don't feel like calling people. I just want to get to my destination. So a lot of times you just say, forget it. The next driver was fantastic, so it's done. I'm just going to move on. There's there's literally 1,000 drivers for that one company alone. 4,000 total that serve LAX. So that's sort of the solution, right? Do you seize the moment? And then all these things start rushing to your mind. Well, I work for ESPN. I've taken on some of these issues before. I have a responsibility. I have visibility. I have access. I could actually do something. And I was obviously also very upset about it. So I go back to the hotel and I start making some phone calls. And first I call the taxi company. And then I call the supervisory company. And it's late hours, but they get back to me, and that starts to unfold this whole dynamic. So, but I had to learn the facts, right? That's one of the issues you run into. It's a very emotional issue, and this day, I know it's challenging for this generation, right? You can boom, 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 Twitter, 140 characters, now 280, right? 280. 280 characters, I could say a whole lot about this, right? I could put at LAX, I could put all kind of stuff, and all of a sudden it's out there, right? And then what do? I look at how many likes I get, or responses, or retweets, and then I'm feeling good because it's like 15,000 of them, right? And it's great, it's taking off. But then all of a sudden the message is gone. And any way that you can collaborate, any opportunity that you have to work with maybe what you think is the other side may actually be an ally in solving this problem. And so once you go national, which I had the ability to do very quickly, it's now whoever you're working against or whoever's sort of an enemy of this situation gets defensive. And they start putting up firewalls, boom, 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 boom. But if you approach it in a way that's collaborative, that they're part of the solution, which they are, you might actually get a different response. And so it was tempting to be out there and like, yeah, can you believe what just happened to me? Can you believe at United Taxi and all these things? Well, then all of a sudden now they're dealing with opinions of other people coming in, and now they're defending themselves. And you might run into legal issues, whatever it is, right? Facebook and all. So that was one of the questions. So I figured maybe it's important to know what I'm talking about. Because I don't know. So yes, this happened, and I know this was wrong, and I believed wholeheartedly it was racially inspired. However, I needed to know the law. I needed to understand exactly what's at play here. And this is the slow work, and it's not that sexy, but it's what will actually inform you on all the next steps if you really want to make change that actually sustains itself. So the Monroe Civil Rights Act, 1959, was a California legislation. It is the most, it's the strictest Civil Rights Act, I would say, in the state law-wise in the United States. They don't play. And also governing this situation is taxi management agreement set March 2011, sort of a consortium of Los Angeles and LAX and the taxi cab, where they came up with sort of policies and protocols. And one of those things you'll see that comes up is about what they call a short trip. So know what you're talking about. So here's the Civil Rights Act. I'll read it to you. All persons within the jurisdiction of this state are free and equal, and no matter what their sex, race, color, religion, ancestry, national origin, disability, medical condition, genetic information, marital status, sexual orientation, citizenship, primary language, immigration status, are entitled to the full and equal accommodation, advantages, facilities, privileges, or service in, underline, all business establishments of every kind whatsoever. I mean, you don't get any stronger and broader than that. Do not discriminate in California. That's what they're telling. We don't care why. We don't even need to know. You can't do it. It's illegal. So the taxi management agreement sort of hones in a little further into the world of taxis, and LAX certainly apply. You may not refuse service. Now there are conditions. You know, you have a belligerent passenger, he's drinking, and there's definitely small clauses in there, but certainly not because of race or anything along those lines. Now the general tolerance for a short trip is this. If you are at the airport and you're going to the Marriott across the street and there's a shuttle, they can then say respectfully, I have to decline, there's a shuttle service that you can take. That's a scenario where they can refuse. So I had to think about, well, neither of those were my situations, but it made me at least understand the conditions where service could be refused. But there's penalties. Now they created a tribunal, so to speak, almost like a internal system where all the taxi companies came together and formed its own sort of trial system. And it was sort of to expedite any, sort of larger scale legal disputes. They ended up having their own internal works. And so this seemed to be somewhat effective. They'd go in and they'd come up with suspensions or whatever was necessary. But they had no complaint handling procedures from the standpoint of, now that this happens, what do I do? I was talking to people, but there was no sign up saying, call this number. It was like, find it out yourself. And when I started to look into it, there was, phones were disconnected. Websites couldn't find anybody. It was broken. And a lot of complaint systems are broken. That's half the battle. Just, is someone actually going to hear what I'm saying? And because who has weeks and weeks and weeks to dig up this stuff? People just get tired and they let it go. So here are the available resources I've kind of found. There's public officials, advocacy organizations. I talked to the ACLU, airport authorities, as I mentioned, the dispatch company, taxis, all these players. The media certainly became a factor for me, and witnesses and complaint systems. So you try to get a stock of sort of inventory of who's around that could actually make this change possible. But in my moment, I kind of recognized people you have to turn to. You need support in this because it could be a marathon, and it was a marathon. You have your trusted circles, courageous informants like the woman who came out and said, whoa, you got to get out. You got to, that was big. Realizing that you're not alone. There's people with this story. My story is many stories. So when you find that, you can find people with like experiences that can elevate the conversation and really help make change broader. There's silent supporters. Maybe there's political reasons people can't quite say this, can't say that, but then behind closed doors are like, I'm going to help you. We got to find out who that is. Research. I learned to expect success, but also pushback. You don't know what's in play here. It's a big deal. Are you calling out LAX? Who are you calling out? Because somebody may not like it and may find a way to push back and certainly get on the ground and engage. So I wrote this article for The Atlantic, Why I Still Get Shunned by Taxi Drivers. And I've learned that the headline matters. Every single word in there matters. And I didn't necessarily choose it with The Atlantic's work, but I became really in tune with the power of words. The power of words. You can make accusations. There's a lot of things that can change how people will receive that article. So I started this search of the camera. I mentioned the description. Now this was what the dispatch company sent me. So, and this is what I learned, because when you realize that no matter how much and how passionate you are in believing in something, there's another side of the story. Even if it doesn't justify the actions, there's something to learn. And what I learned was this. After weeks of looking to figure out the driver and the rules and the article, I pressed the airport taxi, the dispatch company, and they sent me this picture. So it's like, oh, wow, hey, that looks like the guy. Great, got him. And it's certainly like after 6 weeks, you just want to pin it on something, right? You just want to be over and done. And then I had a moment. I said, well, wait a minute. Aren't I running into the same issue that he put me in, right? I'm looking at a picture, seems like it could be the guy, so I'm done. I can close the case and I can make my decision and judgment there. But there's 1,000 taxi drivers on this company. Could there be 3 guys that look like that? Could there be 4, 50? I have no idea. So, and I sent it to my colleague and he said, yeah, it looks like him, but I'm only 90% sure. So it's the fitting the description issue that we run into a lot in our society. It's that fitting the description has been criminalized on some level, right? It's like, well, it's almost like a guilty label on somebody, even though you're just saying they match this sort of broad definition of who this person could be. So they sent this after I was pressing them on, first of all, I was getting the wrong cab numbers, all kind of stuff was going on. And I finally realized that's a moment where I can't proceed using that information. Because if I do, I'm just jumping into the assumption, and I can't 100% say that's him. It was a blur, it's at night, the guy's yelling at me, things are, I need more than that. Thousands of drivers. And so it ended up being a video that ended up coming to light. As I mentioned, Los Angeles Airport has a lot of video that changed everything. So it led to this investigation. All the information led to this. And this is when you have to look at who knows who could be the strange bedfellows, who knows who's going to align. But they created a secret shopper sting. And by then I'd reached the head of LAX, talked to a lot of people, and they were great advocates. So I didn't have pushback from that standpoint. Undercover African-American police officers in plain clothes went out and tried to get a cab. Just said, take me, and at a destination, they would mix it up. So they conceded that it was worse than expected, and it was actually shocking that 6 out of 25 attempts were completely refused service. 6 out of 25. So that is astronomical, right? Now, there was different reasons. Some said it was a short ride, things like that, but short rides can be something you could add and piggyback onto other biases, right? Race or whatever. So they had a problem, right? And so the woman who told me I'm the 3rd black guy, they knew something was accurate in that statement. So LAX jumped on board, sent to city council, and they have a special committee that oversees the airport. And they approved the plan to amend the contract between Los Angeles, it's World Airports, like kind of a conglomerate, and the airport's contracted taxi coordinator. And they instituted in-classroom training for 4,000 plus taxi drivers. And that was actually paid for by the consortium. So that was very powerful. And so it appeared in this document, which reviewed, and they adopted this report after deliberation. And this is now, by the way, in January. So you imagine September to January, decent timeline, but it took a little bit of time. And so these were the new policies: 0 tolerance for racial or discrimination along those lines. They kept the secret shopper, as they call it, sting going for a substantial period of time. And the data shows that it's actually been declining. There was one period that had 0. So that was something. And they have ongoing training in addressing biases and assumptions that plague us all. And so the complaint system is something that I learned about in various scenarios. But this was really critical because if you don't know where to turn, if you don't make it easy and accessible, people often lose time or the will, because what I recognized is I had the resources and the time to be patient. I had a job that I worked once a week doing games, and I had all this time, but I realized that people don't have that much time necessarily. They don't, you call enough people to get to the head of LAX. These are not typical scenarios. So how do you make it where anybody who goes through this experience, it's unacceptable, and they have a response, and they have an action plan right at their fingertips? So they made a much better complaint system, 48-hour response time, initiate action, and now they oversee and watch every situation one by one. So, and of course, with that type of ridership, 81 million passengers, this is very important. They even upgraded, they added the website to their signage, contact number. They made sure that they were visible. I mean, the coloration even. So I made a statement. I could read it if you want me to, but it's clear, serious steps were taken throughout the collaborative spirit of many people and organizations that prioritize an equitable, harmonious, and service-oriented experience at LAX. Los Angeles Airport is a hub for one of the most vibrant and diverse centers in our country, and through these measures, it is clear that there is a serious commitment to maintain this truth as a welcome asset. I am very grateful for this swift and powerful statement, given it helps all passengers. We must also not forget that most drivers are courteous, respectful, and diligent, and they should be upheld as examples. So this is where I want to look at the communication, because these are the skills that I learned just working in the field. And I feel these are difference makers to kind of take home with you, to think about how this could have gone a whole lot of other ways. And it matters. The patience matters, persistence matters, passion matters. It's critical to sort of getting to that finish line. And identifying what that finish line is also very important. So I looked at effective storytelling, and Rand could talk about this, but I learned some of these in these particular social justice questions. Being a mirror is important. It's easy to put yourself in front, first person, and say, this is my story, but it has to reflect something where someone sees themselves in the story. Yes, I was a Major League Baseball player, I have certain boxes to check. But what identifies people much more is you're a father, you're a brother, you're a son, you're a daughter, you're a mother. You're just trying to get to your destination after 11 hours of travel. Simple. It doesn't, it's a simple connection that we all look for. And sometimes the sort of hitting it head on is not always effective, because you may want to hit the topic on head on, but there's something to be said that there's so many peripheral things that sort of come about because of these experiences. Well, I went in thinking, okay, fine, I just was refused service because of my race, simple. But then all of a sudden I meet advocates over here, and I realize that LA is committed to this, and I learned about the taxi industry. I learned about the fears that taxi drivers have about getting robbed or going to certain neighborhoods, or then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, all right, wait a minute, all right, let me listen a little bit. You got to listen, because it's gonna give you more information and inform you in a way that would be actually pleasantly surprising at different times, and educate you on being sensitive to the other side. So I always say that, you have to seek justice, you have to be just. You have to go and approach it in a way that you're fair to everybody along the way, even if they're not fair to you. It's because you don't know who's listening, who's watching, who's the next person to carry that torch. And that example is critical. And I think being inconclusive is also important. I know Rand's had jobs like this. You write, and it's like, I need a definitive bam at the end of this article. I need to just be like, and now the Queen of England is no longer powerful, or whatever it is. You have a bottom line. But there's something to be said to recognizing you don't know everything. You're still learning. You're open to certain understandings to evolve. Even when it's definitively clear that something is wrong with this, there's still so much more that you need to learn. I'm still learning things more and more every day from this experience. And I talked about the facts making change and the power of headlines. And I talked, this unemotional sparks emotion, that's sort of the Atlantic is their signature a little bit, right? They're facts, but they also try to kind of walk through this line of facts, but yet it sparks emotion, even though it's not an emotionally outraged article. And I thought that was very powerful in sort of lifting up the social justice questions. Quality of information is critical, as we talked about. Collaboration, experts and advocates, knowing the counter-arguments. Well, in this particular case, the taxi driver did eventually face his hearing and said that it was because it was a short trip. That was sort of his argument. Now, what's interesting about that is I already showed you a $70 cab ride, right? So, and he never took the time to even hear where I was going. So kind of shot those holes in those stories. However, what made him assume that I was going to go on a short trip? That was another part of the equation. So it could have been that assumption also led him down this path where I was actually going way downtown and with significant fare attached to it. But counter arguments are important. And then there's, I'm just a Bill. Anybody, Schoolhouse Rock, I know I'm dating myself, but I know there's Schoolhouse Rock fans in here. That's important. Knowing if your goal is legislation and policy, you got to know what path to take along those ways. Now this is significant, message control. We talk a lot about this, and I know the world has been riveted with Colin Kaepernick and the kneeling and President Trump and all these, but how you could enter something with a certain intent and how it could end up completely over here. And sometimes that's a good thing, but what I've also learned from this experience is that your message can get co-opted. It may well get co-opted as a matter of course. And it doesn't have to be nefarious. It doesn't have to be negative necessarily. And it may not always be from enemies trying to misinterpret your message. It could be someone with genuine concern that sort of drives their own story with it to elevate it. You don't know, so you have to be prepared for that possibility and stay on message on what's really your important goal for what you're trying to achieve. A long-term, short-term plans are critical in this because now I'm here a couple of years later and they're still working on this policy. It's still evolving. Whereas before, if you're saying, well, I'm going to put this out right away on social media and then just sort of get response, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks later, nobody's paying attention to it. Because it becomes in the news cycle, and I know very well as being part of the news cycle, there it is, right? In one ear, out the other. That's not what you want for justice. So you got to be patient. Excuse me. And I mentioned think of others. And I mentioned haters and detractors are not the same thing. You can learn a lot from both. Detractors may not agree. They may not be as strongly opposed, but they can provide, they may still decide to educate you and give you tools to help you achieve your goal. It's possible, and some people are just going to lay in the road. So enduring change, law, policy, and accountability, challenging the political structure. Am I blocking you over here? I told you memorizing I'm just a Bill, very true. Use your leverage constructively for access, if you have it. And if not, you can find it. And know you're going to get stuck from time to time. It spent me 6 weeks trying to find the driver, and it wasn't really about him in the end. It was the systematic questions that came about. So keeping the eye on the prize, so to speak. So metrics, I always ask these questions about your communication plan. Did it have vision? Did it address what are the next steps? Did you have a follow-up plan? Did you reflect the perspective of those seeking justice, or was it about you and your own edification? Did you allow room to grow with others, even people who didn't agree with you? And did it have a practical application? Did you place it into structure, policy, administrative changes? And so here are some of the articles. So I've had this comprehensive experience, and I think what I gleaned from it was what I didn't expect. You go in and you think, well, this is the right thing. This is right. People are going to do right. But you start to see the nuance. You start to see the blurred lines. You start to see the fear and the agendas and the politics and all these factors that come in that could take you in a different direction. But all those factors are critical to solving the problem ultimately in a collaborative sense. You're going to need political willpower, for example, like city council. You're going to need to understand the legislation to know how you're going to enforce this or how you're actually going to make your arguments. You're going to have to know everything you can about taxi life. There's things that I read about Washington, D.C., Seattle, New York City. Washington, D.C. was fascinating because they had this anonymous rider program. And they literally, one day, they had their complaint system, I always mention a lot of them were broken. They got about 5 complaints over 3 years, some ridiculously low number, and they didn't believe the data. So they went in and created an anonymous rider. So they went in just like the police, all different situations, people who had disabilities, whatever, and they knew the laws about you have to pick these passengers up. So they went through it. They had a huge refusal rate. It was in the 30s. So they said, no, okay, now we have a problem. So sometimes that data collection is critical, is important to know so that you can now make your arguments. But there's also examples before you that you can tap. Seattle was fascinating, Chicago, so many cities out there, and that helped create sort of the framework to work with. So that's, the ways that work, they're certainly going to have a case-by-case scenario to it. But you cannot replace the power of effective communication. And if you have the access, or you can find the access, it's important, but not everybody is so situated. I realized that I was in a certain privileged position. But if you use it, and you try to elevate for the greater good, I think there's opportunity where you can really, truly represent something larger than yourself, which is wonderfully empowering and to me, a great way to resolve a situation where now I feel like, wow, there's 81 million drivers. They might not even know about this situation, but there's people who now ride taxis and know that there's recourse, or maybe they just have a normal ride and don't think anything of it. And that's a beautiful thing, and that is the goal. So a lot of times getting it off yourself, as much as it hurts you, when you get that support system around you of people similarly situated, and you realize that the change can sort of reach this larger swatch of people, I think that's what it's about. So so I think that's, and I'm sorry, these are different articles regarding different things. I know West Hartford, and I have the article from the snow shoveling incident years ago, so I know that was part of being here in West Hartford. But all those experiences sort of brought me to this place to sort of conclude these different lessons. And I learned so much about listening is so powerful. It is. Listening to what you think can be the other side could end up being your greatest ally. So, so open for questions. Thanks.
Transformations Med Spa and Fitness in Windsor, Connecticut. Nurse practitioner Raquel Rowe and the amazing staff will transform your body, mind, and soul to make you look and feel your best. They specialize in laser hair removal for any skin type using top-of-the-line FDA-approved lasers. Open Monday through Saturday by appointment only. So call now at 860-217-0764. 860-217-0764. To learn more about all their unbeatable promotions and specials, go to Facebook and become a friend. Make sure to follow them on Instagram.
What's really going on? Oh, baby.
All right. AccessTV.org. This is Big Papa Flavor, checking you guys out all the time. Yeah.
So yes, any questions? And certainly fire away. I mean, it could be totally off topic. It's, my favorite stadium to play in is totally fine. All of the above. But
So great talk, Doug. I was wondering, I think in the last couple of months, so much attention has been, with this stuff coming out with Harvey Weinstein and
Yes.
and what you're talking about tonight. There are like so many things where a person like me, and the way I look, and the kind of like my experiences with public transportation, a lot of it is so invisible to people, and we require these stories to make it visible for so many of us. And I was just wondering if you would talk a little bit about what else are we missing? What else are we not seeing? Where else are there things that are in plain sight but we're not seeing?
That's a great question. I mean, I think part of these experiences sort of, you think of it as almost like contact lenses or glasses or lenses, which you look in, and all of a sudden you get like a new prescription and you're like, wait a minute, now I can kind of see again. And I think anytime you have experiences and you share them and you also are recognizing the universality of social justice. It's easy to kind of be in your own lane, because I already had this experience, African American, I have a certain lens, but then there's so many common elements. In fact, I'd say much more with any experience of anyone who's been through through injustice. And to me, that informs and adds sort of a bandwidth to your capability to be able to identify these moments and stand up for them. It doesn't have to be your demographic box. If you would say, well, what don't we see? I think that's sometimes what happens. First of all, everybody's busy and you have your life and you have this experience, and I'm chasing cabs and cab numbers for 3 months, right? So you're already just trying to deal with your own lane, let alone deal with Hollywood and all these other things, right? But there's no justice if you can't take on the fight for everybody's justice. I think that's, and I feel like what can elevate. I mean, we should be supporting all just causes. I mean, it's the same story. And I don't want to. Many of you may know the Holocaust Museum quote, and I'm going to hack it up. So if anybody has it, but it just talks about if you don't speak up, and all of a sudden it's a continuum. When they come after the next group and you don't speak up, soon you realize there's nobody left to speak for you when they come after you, right? I mean, so who the they are is always interesting, but I think the main thing that I gained from it is this could have been anybody. Those taxi drivers could have looked like anybody. The taxi driver was a Korean gentleman, I think he was actually in his 70s, scared. And I learned later by interviewing and talking to people, there was this very palpable tension at the time in LA between African Americans and Koreans. And I don't know what I was walking into, right? But so you learn and you realize that fear is such a big driver, right? It's such a big driver to sit back and be comfortable and not challenge that fear. And we have, look, bias it's human. It's a human. It is the same tool that we use when you drive home tonight and you don't even think about the left turn or the right turn you make. That's bias, because you're assuming what you already know, right? What you think you already know. You already know if I turn the wheel to the left, it's going to turn. I don't have to go 45 degrees. You don't have to do that, right? But when you overlay that onto people, it's wrought with flaws. And it's not that simple. It's not hitting the X button on your PlayStation. It doesn't do X. It does something else. And tomorrow it does something else. And but when you sort of add fear to that equation, then now you really get into trouble, because now you're defensive, it's survival, it's all these other things that come into play that start to justify the shortcuts that we tend to take. And I believe we would be in a better place of just recognizing that we all have bias. Okay, it's part of being human, and most of the times that's a tool that serves us well. but we think of it so much in the context of people, we forget that it's actually applied to so much of what we do. I mean, can you imagine like having to relearn everything every day, every moment? That's where you'd be if you had no bias. You'd never take any assumption, and then you would never know that opening the peanut butter jar takes, what is it, clockwise direction or counterclockwise to close it, right? So I don't know if that answers your question there, right? Thanks. Yes? Oh, I'm sorry, you get the mic. You can throw it, just throw it. It's baseball in here, come on. Just throw the mic. Oh, yes.
So thank you very much for this talk. I really appreciate it. And it's also very timely. I just wondered if you can talk a little bit about the fact that in most cases, we tend to ignore it and how that impacts us in terms of distress. Because for the most part, we don't, we are often accused of paranoia. And so it's so much easier to ignore it and look the other way and just keep going because we have a life to live, right? So I don't know if that is something you've experienced and it's something that you can elaborate on.
Well, sure. I mean, it's the stress, for example, of taking on every battle, right? And I think the sometimes inefficiency of that. I mean, I mentioned this was actually a relatively brief resolution, but it still was months of my life calling people. Now, I felt I had the time to do it, and it was important, but there's so many of these battles, right? And you wonder if like something is so minute, is it going to change anything? You always have those questions, right? You don't know what's going to come at you when you're taking it on. And we are busy, and we're running, I have 4 kids, and you're just like, and you're like, I don't have time for this, or something happens, and you're like, okay, do I have to kind of go through these machinations again, right? I thought I already solved this problem, right? Or something like that. But when we're talking about the collaboration, I think that's where it comes in. To be alone is difficult in this, and I think there's also an assumption that someone has to be in your demographic box to actually fight the fight. I'm on the Major League Baseball Players Alumni Association, and they formed, for many years they had a minority committee, and one of the last couple of meetings we kind of reinstated it, and most of the members who are African American are in their 70s and they're older. So they kind of assigned who was going to be in this group, and it was all African Americans, and there was one Latino gentleman. I kind of put my hand up. I'm like, you don't have to be black and Latino to be in this group. Like everybody, it's I think you talk about the echo chambers, right? You worry about that sounding. You're talking to yourself, and the way to expand humanity is to kind of continue to realize that, wait a minute, we're actually in the same boat. Like, this is offensive to anybody, and this could have happened to a lot of different people at different times. I think that, to me, that combats the exhaustion of it. If you feel like you're with somebody. It's like Me Too campaign, like, right? It's like, oh, wait a minute, like, you just feel empowered to know I'm not alone. And I'm not like, I'm not capable of raising an issue, and it's the powerlessness that you feel in these moments that really puts you in a situation to feel like you want to give up, and that would be unfortunate.
Mr. Glanville? Mr. Glanville?
Oh,
Hi.
Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
First of all, thank you for your presentation, very powerful. I'm a professor here, and I brought my students with me. We have a course on risk and resilience in youth. And what I'm particularly fascinated about tonight is that whole scenario could have gone another way. You sound to me like in that scenario you were being as reasonable as you could possibly be, but I don't know if anyone could blame you if you got very upset. And you and I know, as people of color, that can all go wrong.
Sure.
That can result in a whole nother situation where you become essentially the offender, at least perceived offender. So I'm fascinated. What is it that you attribute to being able to demonstrate such resilience in the face of a very offensive act?
Well, count to 10. Count to 10. Tell my son, like 1, 2, 3, 4. I attribute a lot to And my father was like, ice water, just, he was calm, cool, collected, psychiatrist by trade. I think he was a great influence and sort of almost like getting in a moment and then seeing the big picture as quickly as possible. Like, okay, this guy's like flipping out, he's belligerent, but I could tell, immediately I thought about, okay, he said it 3 times now, but I kept saying to myself, nothing's gonna go well if I get in this guy's face. I mean, I remember thinking for a second, I could get my phone out and take a picture of the license plate, right? But I thought that could have been seen as something from him, as something aggressive, right? I'm gonna go up and I'm gonna get your number, and I'm gonna, I said, all right, time will tell. And I'm very patient, so I believe that there is no way we wouldn't figure out the information to this case with Homeland Security video and all, that I wasn't worried about. So it kind of helped me in dealing with it. But yeah, it was an affront. I mean, it's, as I mentioned, 11 and plus hours of travel, exhausted, get there. And, you're just trying to get into bed. And it's another 30 minutes or whatever. And so, you just have to really take a deep breath. And it's not easy in these moments, especially when you don't know what's going on at first, And what was fascinating was my colleague, because you could tell, he literally said to me later, he said, now I really understand, and I'm trying to think how he said it. He said, now I really understand what it's like to be black in a situation where people don't believe this is why it's happening. He said it along those lines. When people don't believe like this is what happened. I can't underscore enough. LAX has this leader, her name is Deborah Flint, she runs LA, and she is incredible. And I think what also helped is she was, she's of Jamaican heritage, a Canadian American, and I think I got that right. And she was incredible. I mean, at the time I was thinking, she needs to be like a national leader. She parsed this thing together. Well, first of all, I eventually, I had the access to get to her. And actually, I ended up over her head because of my agent back when I played baseball. So they sent me to her, and we talked a little bit. And I actually, maybe violated the rule of journalism, but I sent a draft copy to her of the Atlantic article, which I actually did for West Hartford also, police. And said, well, here's the information. I don't want to blindside you. I want you to know what excuse me, I want you to know what's coming. But I didn't know if she was friend or foe or what was going to happen. But she took it and ran with it. I mean, she did her own thing. And one day we both went on NPR together. I went on right before her, and she was like, I'll go on, that's cool. And she broke it down. And the thing that was so fascinating is she said, and I'm not going to get the numbers exactly right, but she said, I went back a certain amount of time, significant amount of time, not just the night in question, but before. And first of all, the night in question on the video completely corroborates what you said, which is another thing that happens. You go, whoa, well, maybe I didn't see that right? She got the information to corroborate it, and then she went back and realized there was no complaints in the system. And yet she was seeing on video, or seeing like this is actually happening, and there was no complaints. So to your point, people weren't filing anything. And look, after took me as long as it did, I get it. It was a deterrent, but the patience and quite frankly, going through like the experience with West Hartford Police, that was very helpful. I'm on the police council now, and I have a beautiful history with law enforcement. They were my baseball coaches growing up, my teammates. I approached it the same way, collaboratively, and I learned a lot. But I also learned the patience in the moment. From that experience, thinking about the stakes at the time. So, but I would say patience is critical in social justice. I had a chance to get to interview Jackie Robinson's widow, Rachel, in Cuba. She's 90, I'm a little off, 93, 94, and they were celebrating Jackie Robinson when he broke in 1947. Spring training was in Cuba. And part of the reason was he had better treatment in Cuba than he was in his own country. So they moved the camp to Havana. And the thing that was interesting is the Dodgers, I'm going to get off tangent for a second because it's interesting, but the Dodgers still had Robinson and the other African-American players stay at a different hotel. And Don Newcomb was like, why are you bringing this stuff to Cuba when they're not even asking for it? But talking to her 70 years later, and I saw the patience that it took for her to see what she was seeing, whether it's an African-American president or whatever, was unfathomable to that 70 years ago. So when you see that kind of patience, and you're not necessarily, in my case, I wasn't necessarily in physical danger, it makes it a lot easier.
Thank you.
Yes? Oh, he has a mic there. Oh, I'm following the mic now. So.
Hi.
Yes.
Tony De Jesus. I'm a faculty member here in the Department of Social Work and Equitable Community Practice. We recently changed our name, so you are also an honorary faculty member. Given the spirit of your presentation, we're also neighbors in the West End. And there's a couple, we academics talk about a lot of the things you talk about. We find these fancy terms to describe things. So speaking about your father, a prominent African-American psychiatrist named Chester Pierce coined the term microaggressions that are often used now. It's evolved to talk about the kind of experience that you've described. But often people utilize that term in ways that aren't always as productive as kind of the processes that you talked about in terms of how you respond in the moment, but use that term in a way that experiences that as an offense or invites them to experience it more of an offense. So that's just one thing that I wanted to mention. In some of my work, there's a couple of social work scholars that have identified these skills for culturally relevant or culturally humble practice, and very much parallels the points that you mentioned there in terms of communication. So reflection, active listening, reserving judgment, and entering the other person's world, really trying to understand the other person's experience as if you were them. Certainly the process of influencing policy that you describe is also very compelling in many of the professions in our departments here. But it struck me that you have a unique perch and voice to kind of bridge many of the communities that are in constant tension and conflict around identity and experiences. And so I wanted to kind of acknowledge that and thank you for being that voice. But I think that many of us who may not experience ourselves, even as privileged as some of us may be, as having influence in among decision makers in institutions. What needs to happen for the message that you are conveying, that these processes to really infiltrate in ways where we would realize the kind of just world that we would aspire to, that we aspire to, more completely? I guess in this regard, speaking about the progress that may have been made in Major League Baseball since Jackie Robinson, how do we get institutions of higher education? How do we get public agencies, corporations to kind of, obviously we're all moving in that direction, but there's lots of work that's incomplete. And our current political climate raises lots of concern and questions about how we're going to get there. So I guess it's a long-winded way of asking you, how do you think that we can get there, and how can we amplify your voice?
Yeah, well, I certainly, I always immediately tap experience when I hear that. that question. And for starters, I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey. 1964 claim to fame was that it was the first school district to voluntarily desegregate using a busing program. And so I came along in 1970 and saw this sort of beacon of diversity, this engagement where we had differences, and there was a lot of communities around us that were homogenous, and we kind of felt insulated within our own commitment to diversity and inclusion. And I think that taught me a lot of what you're sort of asking about what helps and where can we go when it comes to trying to work together on these very complicated issues that sometimes you said are systematic or larger. How do you break these sort of long-standing traditions? You see what Hollywood is dealing with, right? This is woven into the culture, right, on some level, right? So how do you unearth that and try to rebuild and still maintain some level of, future vision, so to speak? And and I would certainly say, for starters, students, the next generation, I think it's important to talk about these different tools. Like I'm on Twitter, I have my followers, I have Facebook, I have my likes and different things. That's what we live in a social media world. We live in that world. But I think it's also understanding that all these things are tools, and there's options and how you use them. And certainly working at ESPN, I learned a lot about, okay, Facebook works in this arena and Twitter in this real time. But when it becomes sort of the default voice for everything, right? All right, I'm just going to tell you like it is in 140 characters or whatever, then you start to run into a lot of misinterpretation, a lot of chaos on top of chaos, or popularity sort of supersedes qualitative content or analysis, and all. That's a challenge we have today as the tools. And I imagine every generation looked at the previous one and saw that the tools are a concern. So I would just talk about the simple things that I was finding in these experiences that actually made differences, and a lot of them came down to me just sitting across the table from somebody, picking up the phone and calling somebody, or empathizing, because it's really important to understand the other perspectives and not be sort of arrogant to think that even in the hurt, not thinking that it's only one way, there's only one perspective. I think that's been really powerful, and I think that's harder when you have the absolutism sometimes of like, what's available in the speed of information, right? Just go, and then it's out there, and I don't know where it goes from there, right? But you're wed to it, and it may not be as really reflecting exactly what you want. I mean, we've seen this, like you talk about sports and social justice, it's come to light tenfold now as we see whether it's Colin Kaepernick or many of the other challenges, right? It can be a powerful tool of change, but use it responsibly. Yes?
Sir, I graduated from St. Joseph's College.
Yes.
And there was a class, it was called Logic, and it was taught by Dean Rosa. And I remember from that class, if your premise is incorrect, your conclusion is going to be incorrect. When we take humans and put them into white boxes and black boxes, that premise is incorrect.
Sure.
We all have melanin. It is designed to provide color so that we can be protected when it comes to a lighted planet. We couldn't survive without melanin. So that essentially all humans have color. There is no white and there is no black. We are just all shades of brown as a consequence of melanin. So again, when we have a premise, we're still talking the way the slave master talked 200 years ago. The slave master created white and black in order to divide us, to make one group feel superior to another, because that's the only way you could make them victims. You had to make them feel inferior. And black and white was a perfect way to say, you're not like us. So until we get over this ignorance, we're gonna be a nation divided. This doesn't happen in other nations. It's here in the United States because of slavery. And somehow we've been brainwashed for over, this has been going on for 200 plus years.
No, and I think and the byproduct of that structure is some of the systems in place that are built off of that concept. And I think, and that's a challenge, because how do you talk to an individual about a systematic experience, right? That's sometimes where you lose people. Like, are you blaming me for this or that? The blame starts to feel like part of the equation, and that's difficult. Like when I'm trying to go get a house, and I could give you a litany of experiences, right? Trying to get a car, different things that have happened, right? So and a lot of that is woven into bias, but when bias is institutionalized, then...
It's more than bias, it's ignorance.
Well, ignorance, bias, racism, every ways to, like you said, divide or create sort of a hierarchy that's probably, which to me should be not part of the equation, obviously, but that gets perpetuated generation after generation. And so there's a lot to undo, so to speak, but it's slow work. It's slow work, and like I mentioned with Rachel Robinson, you realize it's slow work, but from where she sits, from her 70 years of time when Jackie Robinson broke in 1947, she's like, oh, well, wow, there's a lot of things that happened. Her children integrated Stamford, Connecticut. And that was what was so interesting. Like, I know, knowing Sharon Robinson, like how hard that was, even though she was a daughter of Jackie Robinson, right? So I think that's the taller order. But until you get enough people, once again, seeing humanity in this larger scale, it's hard to overturn the systems that were built on exactly what you just described.
That was a great story. Oh my God, I'm a Twitter person, so I have to think about this.
No, recipes, there's a lot of great things. It's hard to kind of comment on Kaepernick on Twitter.
Yeah, I know.
My name is J. Stan McCauley, and I do business as LightSource Productions. I provide professional services in the area of strategic video communications. First, what we do is we help you craft your message using what I call the rule of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We do event documentation, content acquisition, full-scale productions, editing, and of course distribution through our social media television network. And with social media, video is more important now than it has ever been. Whether you're talking big business, small business, nonprofit, church, or just an individual. Let's say you plan you're planning an event, a wedding, whatever the case may be. But let's say a big event, but no video. And you spent all this time, all these hours to put this event on, and maybe 100, 200 people attend the event. But more important than that is that thousands could attend by watching it on social media. But of course, you don't think about this until after the event is over. You can't afford not to capture it for social media. And despite what people think, I am affordable. Give me a call. Let's plan your next video project and share it with the world on my social media television network. I promise you that you will have the attention of one person, me.